Welcome to Ethical Edge Insights, Conversations with Changemakers, a space for deeply reflective conversations with those shaping our world. Here we explore their journeys, their greatest challenges, their most significant contributions to date, the contributions they seek to make, and how ethics have shown up along the way. Join us as we uncover the stories that shape our shared future. So, welcome, Tony. Great to have you here for this chat. And to put you in context, wow, I'm remembering the first car ride we had through the Jura, through the mountains, following cyclists, me half hanging out the car window while you're driving around. And I'm thinking how you held your nerve during that brilliant week of me hanging out the window, I don't know. But thank you, because I'm still here and alive. And we got some great photos and we had great fun. So, I mean, that's just an introduction to you and I, and we met through the Lions Club and that particular event, which was brilliant, though I can't remember the name of the event. I've got the Defi 78 in my head, but I don't think that's it, is it?
Défi Saint-Bernard.
Ah, yes, there we go. It was brilliant. And then if we had a follow-up of the Defi 78 around the local Evelyn's area, which was also a brilliant event, even if it wasn't as big as what we'd hoped. And so by then you were kind of in retirement, moving into retirement, change of careers or stuff. This was happening. But your career is really interesting and you've had a huge impact across a particular area of work. But you're a coach now. And I'd love for you to tell us more about your career history and how you got to be coaching and kind of what inspired you to be here where you're at now.
Thank you, Wendy-Ann. Thank you for the introduction. And thankfully, it wasn't me that was hanging out of the car window whilst I was driving. As far as my career is concerned, I had a couple of false starts at the very beginning because I was exploring. I didn't really understand what I was capable of doing or what I really wanted to do. But I hit on the idea of teaching, and then after 3 years moved into the area that I have been in all of my life, which is supporting, developing, managing people. So I've been in human resources roles in 3 large international organizations, and the last of which was L'Oreal, where I started in the UK. I was HR director for the UK and Ireland, and then moved to France 27 years ago now, coming up to 28. And I had a variety of international roles working out of Paris for L'Oreal. And at the end of a long career, in fact, the last job I had was looking after the top 250 senior executives of the group, which was fabulous because it was also a startup role, because that role simply didn't exist previously. And when it came for me, time for me to bow out of the organization, I was an early retiree. It was a no-brainer to continue working, and I was attracted to the idea of coaching. Because if you like, the red thread of much of my career is helping others to develop themselves. That's, it was a role in teaching, it was a role in human resources management, and it was central to a role of coaching, obviously.
So then you went on and studied coaching specifically. And what are some of the courses that you've taken around that? Because you went all in.
Yeah, well, I decided that I wanted to be trained simultaneously both in French and in English. So I went to a Mosaic International, which is a coaching school in Paris, well known. And at the same time, I enrolled with Bristol University in the UK. And I did 2 programs more or less in parallel, which covered much of the same ground, but with some differences. So I'm trained in behavioral and systemic coaching approaches. I've done other things since, but and also did a lot of the basic tools, so training in basic tools like TMP, MBTI, DISC, and others, Lumina, Spark, and others, which I've taken on. And of course, amongst the tools of the tools of coaching, you use tools like 360, 180, and so on. So I, give support feedback on those sort of tools as well as part of the coaching tools that I use in my practice.
So one of the things you don't know that I'm going to share that I've admired and learnt a lot from you was when you were president of the Lions Club and the way you went about managing some challenging characters, or one in particular. We don't need to name names, but we know that it was a challenge. But I mean, you just did that in a way that was just so smooth that I do not do, or at least didn't do. And but just also the way you chaired the meetings, you had a really calm, inclusive way of generating people's conversation and thoughts to bring to them. So how much of those kind of skills, so I guess I'm landing that in terms of your leadership work at L'Oreal and the many meetings you would have held there, and also your coaching role, and that how much sits within the consulting of, given your history, and also then switching to consulting, and how do you do that in the coaching space?
That's a big question because we've gone through my professional career, my handling meetings, coaching, and so on. So let me start with meetings first of all. I mean, meetings. I mean, I've been through training programs, so I understand the the pitfalls that are one can easily fall into in meetings, whether they be virtual or in presential, as the French would say. Um, I think I'm also pretty sensitive to people and to people's needs. So when you talked about being inclusive, it's because I think I am sensitive to people. I'm also sensitive to situations. And I combine that, if you like, with a drive for results, for performance, for getting things done, which of course, if you then translate that into the coaching role, has to become modified because it's not me driving for results. It's helping the other person to find their way in whatever speed, whatever way makes sense to them, with perhaps some encouragement, maybe some suggestions from myself. So there's when I move from a management or a leadership role or a senior executive role within L'Oreal to coaching, one of the things that I had to curb was this drive for results. I can see the answer to the person's problem. Let me give them some suggestions and everything will be resolved. Wrong. So one of the things that I have to curb is to transform that energy into an energy which concentrates totally on the person in front of me, and to understand with the sensitivity I have for that person, for their needs, for the context that they're in, and also, if you like, situational intelligence or organizational intelligence to understand what might be going on for the person in their work context or in their organizational context. So I guess it's I have as people would say, grey hairs, and one of the benefit of grey hairs is having sufficient wisdom to have learnt through mistakes, but through many learning experiences to hopefully give my clients, coaches, coachees, the opportunity to resolve whatever issues, problems, challenges they may have in their own way with my support.
So I think something that's interesting about you is that you do come across as this really calm person. You seem to hold it together in some really tense moments. And I'm just thinking there's something about how you're able to do that you transfer to the coaching space, but it also hides in some ways a really strong drive and energy to be able to get things done. What are some of the tools that you've found as useful to keep that in balance or spruiking up in its right space?
Well, firstly, I find with children, with people in a learning situation, and particularly coachees, that I have enormous patience. Sometimes I don't understand, but that doesn't lead me to be impatient. I can be very calm, very patient with people that are learning or have needs in that respect. Whereas in my other life, my my non-working life, I can be very impatient because I do want to get there quickly. I do want results, and I'm very impatient with those who might get in the way. So where does that come from? I honestly don't know. There's something in me that recognizes a need and a strong response to that need. And something which maybe we'll come on to later on in terms of so-called ethical behavior. You're going to talk to me about ethics, I'm sure. I've always had, and I don't know where this comes from, a strong value set that says that is simply not fair. Whether it be a situation which seems to me to be unfair given everything else that's going on, or something which is unfair to the individual, or simply practicing fairness, which maybe comes back to meetings management, but also comes back to one of the principles that I have in being fair to the coachee, and working through with that person whether they see their behavior either received or given as being fair. Fairness, I think, is for me a very important issue.
Me too. And fairness, I've known has been a strong driver of mine my whole life. But at the recent Coaching Ethics Forum conference, David Clutterbuck started talking about fairness, and he said something that just blew my idea of what my positioning of fairness is apart. And I'm just like, oh, now I got to re-question that whole idea about fairness, because so many of us do speak about fairness. It's not fair. I want to make it fair. It should be fair. But in fact, when we say that, we are saying it from our positioning of what fairness is, and not necessarily of what the other people are viewing fairness is. And that was just like a wake-up call for the first time my whole adult life, or my whole life that I can remember, that I've questioned just what fairness is for me in comparison to what other people is. It's like you take a stock standard. It's fair. We all know what's fair and what's not. And actually we don't. We can't take that for granted. It was just like a mind-blowing thing for me in the conference. So it's one that's tricky to work with, but when you start questioning it, it's amazing what comes up. There's just one I want to add there.
No, you're right. And I mean, I have to transform, if you like, my desire for fairness and put that in the mind of the coachee to decide, for that person to decide whether or not he or she believes that that might be fair or not in the situation.
So I want to move on to the next question. It says, what do you consider to be your most important contribution across your career?
Wow. Well, I have a career of nearly 40 years plus the 10 years plus in coaching.
Yep.
So that's a very big question. I think that what runs through all of the working and maybe social experiences that I've had over the last, let's say, 50 years is I'm coming back to that notion of fairness. People find me generally to be fair because I do listen. I do make judgments that are considered and considerate. And I'm also somebody that's fairly open. I don't necessarily judge. I'm sure I do have biases and judgments that consciously or unconsciously I deploy, but I try to be fairly open-minded, fairly even-handed, not to rush to conclusions, not to get angry too quickly. And all of that is sort of part of my personality. And I think in my role in HR, in my role as a teacher, in my role as a coach, I think that notion of fairness in the way that I've expressed it is perhaps one of the qualities that I've managed to bring, which has had an impact on other people that have appreciated that openness and that fairness.
I love where you're going with fairness. I don't know if you're thinking on the spot right now with it, but I love where you're going with it anyway, whichever one it is.
This is not prepared, I can assure you. I did
Oh
read
no,
questions, but I have not a script that I'm following at all.
no, I know, because you don't know that this is part semi-structured conversation, so it's reflective in part, and it's really interesting what arises in those conversations. So let's get to ethics. It's kind of the elephant in the room for these conversations. What role does ethics play in your decision-making processes? And do you have an example to share with us?
Well, you won't be surprised that for me, there are a number of values, I guess, underlying what I think to be an ethical approach, but the most important principle for me is fairness. That is taking into account the other person's point of view, the situation, and trying to achieve some sort of balanced um, decision or a balanced position, ideally with the other person or persons concerned, so that it's not just my point of view, not my notion of fairness. If I were try to think of a particular example, I guess my most recent examples are in coaching, and I think one of the reasons that I'm successful in coaching, at least according to the acknowledgements given to me by my coachees, is because they do find me very open, a listening attitude, no judgments. They feel completely at ease to be able to talk freely about the things that concern me most. And, at the same time, being able to, through questioning, through, rephrasing, through the other techniques of coaching, or perhaps suggestions, which I can offer by myself, because in my coaching approach, I sometimes go into mentoring mode. I sometimes go into consulting mode. I let them know what I'm doing so that they're aware that, they are in a different space with me. But all of those things give them the opportunity to be heard in the fairest way possible, and the outputs are the most objective, the fairest possible. Other elements of perhaps an ethical approach, I'm very sensitive to questions of diversity in all of its senses, and one of the elements of diversity which I've reflected on since becoming a coach is the way in which we see the world. If you think about simple personality tests like MBTI or DISC or Lumina, or other well-known names in this field, we all look at the world and think about the world and act in different ways because we have different personalities. And that sort of diversity for me is very important when I'm thinking about my interactions with coachees, or if I'm handling a meeting, or if I'm working on team coaching, for example. So the results of having that sensitivity is that sometimes I can be rather crowded out with many different elements coming from left, right, and center. Because if you're thinking about individuals and their differences, the interactions that they have with their team members, their colleagues, and then the interactions that they're having with people outside of the team, it becomes extremely complex. So sometimes I'm in danger of being in overload, information overload, which I'm also sensitive to. And then it's a question of coming back and sorting out the essential from the non-essential in a situation. But again, overall, responding to your question, for me, ethical questions are to me about fairness with whatever criteria might be applied to a particular situation.
Do you have a specific example?
A coachee recently had a situation with his boss, and the end of the discussion with my coachee was that he actually coached his boss.
Ah.
Which was an interesting situation, because he was in a situation which was very unfair. He felt it was unfair. He wanted to make that unfairness known to his boss with all the possible consequences that you can imagine in an organization. And at the end of the day, he decided, once we'd had the discussion, to adopt a coaching approach which worked very well with his boss, who was under a lot of pressure and displaying behaviors which were simply unhelpful, simply because he was under pressure. And what he found, his boss, was that my coachee, his subordinate, turned out to be the best coach that he could have imagined.
Amazing. What time span did that take?
Oh, it wasn't very long. We had it cropped up in one of the first meetings, and by the third meeting, so maybe a month or so later, he'd had chance to think about it, reflect, think about options, and decide that that was the right course of action for him. And in fact, the initiative primarily, I mean, I had framed things in a way perhaps that allowed him to think in that direction, but the decision was his.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. And it's nice to hear the decision was with the coaching client. Can you describe a time when you were challenged to act on a decision and how you overcame it?
I was challenged to act on a decision which I found unethical.
Where I'm deliberately leaving the word ethics out of
Right.
this question and just saying challenge to act. So there's something that you needed to act on, and it is challenging in a myriad of different ways, potentially.
Well, a myriad. Yeah, exactly. How can I pick one?
Yeah.
Um, so I'm thinking of a challenge which I wasn't at all sure about, but because it was my boss and I didn't have sufficient arguments to say otherwise, I carried on, which perhaps wasn't the best decision. But I can think about that situation. Would you like me to say a few words more, or do you have a more specific question?
Yeah, so you can, like, you don't have to name anyone or name the entity or anything like that, but certainly describe the situation and the outcome for you.
Well, I proposed a number of objectives at the year-end appraisal, and my boss um, added one or two others, which I wasn't particularly happy about. We had a discussion. I didn't have sufficient arguments, as I said, to contradict the suggestions. So the objective was set, and the objective, unfortunately, was never achieved, despite my best efforts, and they were my best efforts. It wasn't a question of dragging my feet because I didn't really believe. Maybe if I had really believed, I may have done something more, but the reality was that I did the best under the circumstances, and they were my perhaps self-imposed constraints. And the project did not achieve success.
So is that one of those times where it's like intuitively you kind of know that this isn't right, but you just are unable to ask for the time or the space to actually
Yeah,
dig into it and get your thoughts around it?
yeah, I think so. Yeah. And I was under some pressure to accept. I didn't quite understand at the time why that objective could have been set. I rather believe that because it was related to a prior project that my boss had successfully managed in a previous role, and I guess that my boss wanted that project to be reenacted in a new way, and that was her desire, and that's how the objective was formulated. It wasn't the best of objectives, it wasn't the best of ideas, and I know that since I moved on, that particular project has been quietly shelved. Maybe it'll re-emerge at another time, I don't know, but it was a situation which I did find uncomfortable.
Yeah, and it's in that uncomfortableness that we can start passing apart what the ethical concerns are within and it's a common thread in the executive world, which is where I'm assuming you're speaking to. I could be wrong. That time pressure has people have to continue to travel on a path that they are unable to really articulate very well, even why they're continuing on that path. And the challenges are, how do we manage that in reality? Do we do what you did and many others do, and you continue on because of the pressures that are around, or do you find another way? And what might that way be?
Well, I think the first thing is to express, that feeling that somehow this doesn't sound quite right. The difficulty is that if it doesn't quite sound quite right and the reaction is more intuitive, in an organizational world, intuition might be important, but logic and rationale are probably in most organizations most listened to. And at the time, I didn't have much in terms of logical rationale to argue against the project because arguably there was a business need, there was even a priority that you could imagine. But I didn't have sufficient ammunition to be able to say, no, I understand that may be a project, but there are other more important projects, or that project could perhaps pass to another year or to another person, or that project could be reimagined in another way. So intuition, yeah, but logic and argumentation, that's French, are probably better tools. But hierarchy also plays its role. This objective was not something which was proposed by myself, developed by myself. It was imposed during the course of the meeting. So, had that objective been proposed to me, I could have reflected on it. I could have perhaps developed some arguments, but in the reality, in the meeting, I didn't have that opportunity, and therefore it was an imposed decision.
So, what were the outcomes for you personally within your professional space?
Clearly a feeling of falling short, of failure, of not meeting expectations, of not being up to the job, of not being able to manage to find the necessary creativity, innovation, or simply the energy to be able to come up with the project requirements. So, a lot of feelings of inadequacy, if you like, along the way.
Which is astounding to hear from you, because I know how creative and innovative your thinking is. So it goes to show that it happens to all of us, this outcome.
Yeah, or maybe it was the end of the road for me in that particular role. I don't know, because there's also battle fatigue that sets in. I was in that role for 7 years, and maybe also contextually, it was, I think, the 5th or 6th year out of the last 7 with the organization. So maybe there was a certain battle fatigue as well.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to move on to the next question, because it is semi-structured. It's that, what legacy do you hope to leave through your work? Another big question. Forward thinking.
Yeah, well, I hope, because the red thread of my professional career has always been with helping others to develop, to do better, to overcome issues, problems, challenges. I hope that I've left behind me, somewhere along the way, individuals that I've taught or managed or worked on in an HR role, or been a coach to, or even a consultant to, that all of those people have in some ways been strengthened by the framing of the discussions that we've had, if they're coaching led, by some of the questions that I've asked, and perhaps some of the support, perhaps some of the advice that I've given, and perhaps also simply by my way of being. Maybe people along the way might learn that the approach that I've taken, I'm sure doesn't fit all. I'm sure doesn't fit all situations either, but does have some merits, there's some advantages.
What are your thoughts about questions in coaching? I remember being asked once, what are the questions you ask when you're coaching? I didn't have a very good answer for the space that I was talking in, and I was sick, granted, but I find that coaches, especially new coaches, finding their way, they want to know, what is it you ask? What is it that's the gold that gets to the other end? What are your thoughts about this thinking?
Well, listening is a fundamental posture for a coach, and a very simple question with a receptive coach might need very little in terms of further questions initially. I think what helps people who are in a coaching situation are those questions that cause them to reflect on perhaps what they've said, perhaps the way in which they've said it, or perhaps what they've not said. So all of these inputs are important. Obviously, the best questions are going to be open questions. And often in coaching, we talk about powerful questions. So those questions that really cause the individual to reflect on their own experience or on what they've said or on what they've not said.
Do closed questions also do that?
Closed questions are useful, but probably more for the coach to check out facts. Sometimes they can be electroshock for the coachee because all of a sudden they realize that, for example, somebody with a question, a problem of time management, how many hours sleep do you get? Maybe a relatively closed question, but it's an important one just to know how much rest they're getting, for example. But yeah, closed questions have a role, of course, but the most reflective questions, which is where the space where most coaches aim to be in terms of, obtaining access to the interior world of the coachee, introspection, reflection, intuition, insights come from that inner reflective world, and the open questions are those most likely to get there.
I would say that asking them how much sleep they get would also invite them to check in on themselves as well. They go, I don't know. I've not actually, to give you a concrete answer, I'm now a bit scared to do that. Just how
Yeah,
much
well,
sleep.
that's the electroshock. You're
Yeah.
right.
So, what do you believe is the most pressing issue in your field of work today? And how are you going to address it?
Well, one of the most recent challenges to any work is artificial intelligence. I had a very interesting conversation yesterday with a coaching group on is it ethical to record coaching conversations, even if the coachee is fully on board and accepts. And I mean, that's not artificial intelligence, but obviously the questions that relate to confidentiality and the use of artificial intelligence to find solutions, for example, for coaching problems for the coach and for the coachee is a very interesting area to explore. I mean, most coaches would say, no, that's not a very healthy approach. Maybe responding to a commercial proposal might be a useful way of using an artificial intelligence to speed up the process, but even that in itself is not the complete answer. And artificial intelligence is finding its way into coaching situations. So, instead of talking to a Wendy Ann, I might be talking to Wendy Ann, who is in fact an avatar. who is going to be listening and nodding her head very intelligently and responding using artificial intelligence. So I think, and I don't know at this stage whether that is a threat or simply an interesting challenge, because artificial intelligence, including the inclusion now of emotion. I'm less sure about intuition and creativity in AI, but the use of intelligence and emotional intelligence and cross-cultural intelligence. Obviously, it's all programmable. 99% of it is programmable. So I think that's one of the interesting challenges, and I'm not quite sure what an ethical position might be on speaking with a coach that is AI powered.
It's an interesting conversation that's just ongoing, but there's a couple of things that kind of come to my mind when you mention the cultural programming that we can happen. There already is cultural programming in AI, and it's white male. So how they extend it out of the white male programming is something to be addressed. Then there's the other element. What did you mention now? I'm just trying to remember because you said so much, which is great. It's the ethical challenges around it and their multitude. And it goes from when you're just recording spaces, it's like, why you're recording, what are you going to do with it, and how other people, how then you move to from just the electronic space to then the AI input space and the challenges around that. There's so much to, I think, for us to be able to gather and use and actually have benefit from. It kind of reminds me of when the advent of the internet came along and we could go open up a browser and start searching stuff. We're going, oh, you're just so worried about this entirely new thing that if you were younger watching the Jetsons, you're going, are we entering the Jetsons age? And you're a bit frightened because you don't know about it. But I think there's some wonderful things that can happen from its inclusion. It's just how we're being mindful of how that happens. But it's
I think that there's also inevitably the fear, which I think is correct, of how AI could be used in a manipulative way.
yeah.
We've seen on the internet with all the stuff that's available, all the bad stuff that becomes available and is indistinguishable unless you're very discerning or have tools, analytical tools, to be able to sort out the wheat from the chaff. It's very challenging from that point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, I did something the other week. I was contemplating a new hairstyle or a new color because I'm gray as well, but I hide it. And I took a photo of myself and put it into chat, which mine's on private, so it doesn't go out into the broader space. And I said, what do you recommend for my hair in terms of coloring? And it didn't just give me text back to describe it. It actually gave me a recalibrated photo of the one I'd given it of myself. And I'm like, wow, I can really see, yeah, the hair looks great. I want that hair. But you could see it wasn't me. It just like, it was me, but not me. So it was quite clear, but that was fascinating. For me, I found that fascinating. And I guess if we can control it in some way, and that's the issue around it, is what kind of control mechanisms we have to be able to manage all these elements. What do you think we can do about it, or what do you think you can do about that, about in and around your own practice?
I think on one hand being open, because there are a lot of good things that are happening in the world of AI technology, and which can add an enormous amount to our working and our social, our family lives. So I think being open and not being over cautious, I think is one element. The other element is exploring what are the controls, the procedures, and that, of course, is increasingly difficult for any single individual to know. It was fascinating yesterday in the coaching conversation, looking at people's practices with AI, because AI is obviously arriving very, very fast. And your questions about, how do we control that, or what should we be doing about that, are very difficult to answer, because it's not something which is controllable in terms of people-to-people conversations. It's exponential in terms of algorithms and the use of data, which are are processing at speeds which are unimaginable to the human brain. Even if you were to connect all those human brains together, it would be difficult to replicate what's happening in the world of AI and data management.
I know that bit is just, I don't know, is it frightening? No, but that's just astounding, actually, that we've been able to create such an entity, and then consequently lack so much control around it.
I
Because
mean, if my maths are correct, 40 years after 1984, 1984, which was generated, I don't know, 50 years before 1984 or thereabouts. What's happened since 1984 is just astounding, as you say.
yeah. Well, I guess just keep reflecting on it. It's a bit difficult because it's AI is embedded in ways that we're learning all the time. If we open up a new application, realize that there's some AI embedded in that and that we don't have so much control over a little bit. So I think there's a lot, our regulatory bodies have a lot to answer to in around that.
When they exist.
Yeah. So we're at the end. Thank you so much, Tony. It's been a great conversation.
My pleasure. My pleasure. My pleasure. And I'm not sure I've answered all of your questions as fully as you might have wanted, but I've done my best without any preparation and no AI either.
I think people will be delighted with what you've had to say here. So thank you again.
My pleasure. Look forward to talking with you another time soon.